The emergency klaxon screamed through mining station Kepler 442b like a wounded beast, its metallic shriek echoing off the reinforced titanium walls. Chief Administrator Vextar's forearms moved frantically across his control console, his chitinous exoskeleton clicking with anxiety as readings flashed angry red across multiple displays. Containment breach in Biolab 7, announced the station's AI in its maddeningly calm voice. All personnel evacuate to emergency zones immediately. Vextar's compound eyes swiveled toward the main viewport where the gas giant Kepler 442b dominated the view, its swirling storms casting eerie purple light across the station's hull. 3 months ago, the mining operation had discovered something extraordinary in the planet's asteroid ring: eggs. Not just any eggs, but massive, crystalline structures that pulsed with an inner heat that defied all known physics. The Galactic Scientific Council had been ecstatic. First contact protocols were established. The eggs were carefully transported to the station's biolab for study. Everything had gone according to procedure until yesterday, when the first egg cracked open. Status report. Vextar commanded into his communicator, his voice betraying none of the fear that made his secondary hearts race. The hatchlings broke through the reinforced barriers again. Came the panicked voice of Dr. Keth Moran, the station's chief xenobiologist. They're in the ventilation system now. We've lost contact with 3 security teams. Vextar's mandibles clicked in frustration. The creatures that emerged from those eggs defied classification. They stood roughly 2 meters tall on powerful hind legs, their bodies covered in scales that seemed to absorb light itself. Their heads were elongated with razor-sharp teeth and eyes that burned like molten gold. Most disturbing were their claws, retractable talons that could slice through standard hull plating like tissue paper. The station's crew had taken to calling them dragon babies, though nothing about these creatures was infantile except their apparent age. They moved with predatory grace, communicated through subsonic growls that made the station's hull vibrate, and showed an intelligence that unnerved even the most experienced xenobiologists. Estimated casualties? Vextar asked, though he dreaded the answer. None dead, surprisingly, Dr. Keth Moran replied, his relief audible. But 17 crew members in medical with various injuries. The creatures seem to be playing with us rather than hunting. They're incredibly strong. Security Chief Borghan tried to stun one with a plasma rifle. The creature caught the bolt in its claws and threw it back. Vextar's primary eyes widened. Plasma bolts traveled at nearly light speed and reached temperatures of several thousand degrees. The idea of any biological entity catching one was absurd. How many hatchlings are we dealing with? 5 confirmed. Possibly 6. They moved too fast for accurate counts. The administrator pulled up the station's blueprint on his main display. Kepler Station housed nearly 400 beings from 17 different species, all working the lucrative mining operation in the asteroid belt. The station was divided into 7 major sections connected by a network of corridors and maintenance shafts. Biolab 7 was located in the research sector, but the ventilation system connected every part of the station. Have you tried the sonic pacifiers? Vextar inquired. First thing we attempted. The creatures seemed to enjoy the high-frequency sound. One of them started making similar sounds back, nearly shattered the lab's observation windows. What about the pheromone suppressors? No effect. Their biochemistry doesn't match any known species in our databases. We're essentially dealing with something completely outside our experience. Vextar studied the casualty reports streaming across his secondary monitor. The injuries were consistent with claws and impact trauma, but no one had been killed. The pattern suggested the creatures were indeed toying with the station's inhabitants rather than viewing them as prey or threats. Sir, came another voice over the communicator, this time from Engineer Talkville in the maintenance sector. We've got movement in the primary life support conduits. Whatever these things are, they're learning our layout fast. Can you seal the sections? Already tried. They figured out the emergency locks in under 10 minutes. Somehow, they're manipulating the control systems without triggering security protocols. The implications sent chills through Vexstar's nervous system. These creatures weren't just physically superior. They were demonstrating technological aptitude that should have been impossible for beings that had emerged from eggs less than 24 hours ago. "What's the status on external communications?" Vextar asked. "Still down," replied Communications Officer Ythera. "The creatures severed our primary transmitter array. We're operating on emergency backups only." "They deliberately cut our communications?" "It appears so, sir. The damage was too precise to be accidental." Vexstar's 4 hands moved across his console as he accessed the station's external sensors. The nearest Galactic Council vessel was 6 days away at maximum warp. Even if they could send a distress signal, help wouldn't arrive in time to prevent whatever these creatures were planning. "All department heads, emergency meeting in Conference Room Alpha in 10 minutes, he announced over the station-wide intercom. Security teams maintain safe distances from the creatures, but continue monitoring their movements. As if summoned by his words, a new alarm began sounding, this one from the power generation sector. "Now what?" Vextar muttered, pulling up the power grid display. "Sir, you need to see this," came Engineer Tocqueville's voice, tight with disbelief. "One of the creatures is in the main reactor chamber. It's studying the plasma conduits. Studying them how? It's running its claws along the energy flow patterns. The reactor efficiency has actually increased by 12%. Vextar stared at the readings in shock. The reactor chamber was protected by radiation shielding that should have been lethal to any organic life form. The temperature inside exceeded 3,000 degrees Celsius. Yet somehow, one of these creatures was not only surviving the environment, but apparently improving their technology. "Pull up the visual feed from the reactor chamber," he ordered. The main screen shifted to show the interior of the reactor room. There, silhouetted against the blinding glow of contained stellar fire, stood one of the dragon babies. Its scales seemed to pulse with absorbed energy, and its golden eyes tracked the flow of power through the station's systems with obvious intelligence. As if sensing the observation, the creature turned toward the camera. For a moment, its gaze seemed to pierce through the electronic barrier between them. Then, it did something that made Vexstar's 4 hearts stop. It waved. "Emergency meeting is now," Vextar announced, his voice barely controlled. "All department heads to Conference Room Alpha immediately." The creature in the reactor chamber tilted its head curiously, then returned to its examination of the power systems. On every monitor throughout the station, warning lights flashed their urgent message. Containment had been breached, and nobody knew what these dragon babies really wanted. But as Vextar watched the creature work with technology it should never have encountered before, one terrifying thought dominated his mind. What if the creatures weren't trying to escape the station at all? What if they were trying to understand it? The station shuddered slightly as another power surge ran through the system. In the reactor chamber, the dragon baby's scales glowed brighter, and its subsonic growl resonated through the hull like a pleased purr. The real question wasn't how to contain these creatures. The real question was what they were planning to do next. Conference Room Alpha buzzed with nervous energy as department heads from across Mining Station Kepler 442b gathered around the holographic display table. The assembled beings represented the best minds from 17 different species, yet none of them had ever encountered anything like the creatures now roaming freely through their station. Security Chief Borghan stood at attention despite the bandage wrapped around his left shoulder, where dragon claws had carved 3 parallel grooves through his armor. The massive Crack-3 warrior's pride was wounded more than his body. In 3 decades of military service across 12 star systems, he had never been so thoroughly outmaneuvered by any opponent. Preliminary assessment. Chief Administrator Vextar began, his compound eyes scanning the gathered officers. "Chief Borghan, your report." The security chief's tusks clicked together in frustration. "Standard containment protocols have proven completely ineffective. These creatures demonstrate tactical awareness beyond anything in our databases. They've disabled 17 security cameras, bypassed 43 locked barriers, and somehow learned to operate our door controls. Dr. Kethmoran leaned forward, her Aldorian tentacles writhing with scientific excitement despite the danger. The learning curve is unprecedented. In 16 hours, they've demonstrated understanding of our technology, our layout, and our behavioral patterns. One creature observed our patrol schedules for exactly 2 hours, then began using that knowledge to avoid our teams entirely. Avoid, Vextar Kirifunet. I thought they were playing with us. That was our initial assessment, Dr. Kethmoran admitted. But reviewing the security footage shows a different pattern. They could have seriously injured or killed dozens of crew members. Instead, they seem to be exploring. Engineer Tocqueville's crystalline fingers danced across his portable console, bringing up power grid displays. The creature in the reactor chamber has made 17 modifications to our energy distribution systems. All of them improvements. Our efficiency is now at 137% of normal capacity. That's impossible, muttered Communications Officer Yathera. Those systems took our best engineers months to optimize. I know what I'm reading, Tocqueville replied firmly. Whatever these beings are, they understand energy manipulation on a level we're only beginning to comprehend. Borghan's massive fist struck the table. Understanding or not, they're still hostile intruders. We need to think about evacuation procedures. With what ships? Yathera's feathered crest flattened against her skull. The creatures severed our docking clamp controls. Nothing can launch without manual override from the outside. A tense silence settled over the room as the implications sank in. They were trapped on their own station with beings whose capabilities grew more alarming by the hour. What about the Zinthari neural pacifiers? Suggested Dr. Kethmoran. If we can establish some form of mental contact, already attempted, interrupted Medical Officer Salgeth, her scaled hide showing stress patterns. The creature's neural activity doesn't register on our equipment. Either their brain structure is completely alien, or they're somehow shielding their thoughts. Vextar's secondary arms manipulated the holographic display, showing the station's current power distribution. Show me everything we've tried. The list materialized in floating text. Sonic pacifiers, pheromone suppressors, neural dampeners, electromagnetic barriers, thermal deterrents, chemical irritants, and even a diplomatic protocol that involved playing various mathematical sequences through the communication system. Nothing worked, Vextar confirmed. Worse than that, Borghan grumbled. They seemed genuinely interested in our attempts. When we tried the electromagnetic barriers, one creature spent 3 hours studying the field generators. When it was done, it had rewired them to create some kind of harmonic resonance pattern that actually strengthened the barriers. You're saying they improved our security systems while we were trying to contain them? Affirmative. The modified barriers are now 40% more effective against everything except them. Dr. Kethmoran brought up biological scans on her portable display. Physical analysis reveals even more mysteries. Their scales appear to be some form of advanced metamaterial. They absorb energy across the entire electromagnetic spectrum and convert it to usable power. Their body temperature remains constant regardless of environment, and their muscle density suggests they could lift approximately 3 times their own body weight. How much do they weigh? Vextar asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Approximately 400 kilograms each. The room fell silent again. Creatures capable of lifting 1,200 kilograms could literally tear the station apart if they chose to. What about their behavior patterns? Vextar inquired. Any predictable routines? Engineer Tocqueville manipulated his display to show movement tracking data. They seem to operate in coordinated groups. 2 creatures explore infrastructure systems, 2 investigate our living spaces, and 1 remains mobile as a roving observer. They rotate positions every 4 hours with mathematical precision. Military organization, Borghan noted grimly. They're conducting systematic reconnaissance. Or scientific survey, Dr. Kethmoran countered. The pattern could indicate research methodology rather than tactical assessment. Does it matter? Communications Officer Ythera's voice carried an edge of panic. Whether they're scientists or soldiers, we can't stop them. As if summoned by their discussion, new alarms began sounding throughout the station. The conference room's main display automatically switched to show emergency feeds from the hydroponics bay. 3 dragon babies moved through the agricultural section with obvious purpose, their golden eyes studying the growing plants with intense interest. One creature carefully extended a single claw and made precise cuts to several vine systems, improving water flow to struggling sections. Another used what appeared to be controlled electrical discharge to stimulate seed germination in the dormant growing beds. They're farming, Dr. Kethmoran whispered in amazement. They understand our food production systems better than we do. The third creature approached a withering fruit tree that the botanical team had been unable to save. It placed both clawed hands against the trunk and stood motionless for several minutes. Gradually, the tree's leaves began to show healthy green coloration, and small buds appeared on previously dead branches. Biological manipulation, Medical Officer Salgeth breathed. They're somehow transferring energy to accelerate healing and growth. Sir, came a voice over the intercom for Navigation Officer Pelvar. The creatures in the engineering sector just activated the auxiliary communications array. We're receiving signals. What kind of signals? Vextar demanded. Unknown. The transmission pattern doesn't match any known language or mathematical sequence. But it's definitely artificial, structured, and repetitive. Vextar's 4 arms moved frantically across his controls, accessing the communication logs. The signal was indeed organized, with complex patterns that suggested meaning, but it bore no resemblance to any form of communication in the Galactic Council databases. Could they be calling for help? Suggested Ythera. Or reporting our capabilities to others of their species, Borghan added darkly. Wait, Dr. Kethmoran said suddenly, her tentacles rigid with realization. What if they're not trying to escape or conquer? What if they're trying to communicate? Explain, Vextar ordered. Every action they've taken has demonstrated superior capability, but they haven't used that superiority to harm us. They've improved our systems, healed our plants, and now they're trying to establish some form of contact. This isn't invasion behavior. It's introduction protocol. You think they're trying to introduce themselves? Borghan's skepticism was evident. Think about it from their perspective, Dr. Kethmoran continued. They emerge in a consciousness on a space station filled with alien beings. They explore, learn, demonstrate their abilities, and then attempt communication. It's exactly what any scientific expedition would do. Then, why haven't our diplomatic protocols worked? Vextar verlängert. Because we've been treating them like animals to be contained instead of intelligences to be engaged. Before anyone could respond, every screen in the conference room shifted to show the same image. All 5 dragon babies standing together in the station's central hub, looking directly at the cameras. They had arranged themselves in a perfect pentagon, and their scales were pulsing in synchronized patterns that created a hypnotic light display. Then, simultaneously, they began to make sounds. Not the subsonic growls they had used before, but complex harmonic patterns that resonated through the station's hull like music. They're singing, Dr. Kethmoran realized. They're trying to teach us their language through song. The melody was beautiful and alien, with mathematical precision underlying every note. It spoke of vast distances, ancient wisdom, and patient hope. As the creatures sang, their scale patterns shifted to match the harmonic frequencies, creating a visual representation of their music. How do we respond? Vextar asked quietly. We learn, Dr. Kethmoran replied. And we hope they're as patient with us as we should have been with them. The singing continued, filling the station with alien harmony, while 5 beings that no one could touch offered the gift of first contact to anyone willing to listen. But deep in the maintenance tunnels, another story was about to begin, one that would change everything they thought they understood about these magnificent creatures. Jake Morrison had been fixing things since he could hold a wrench. The 32-year-old human mechanic possessed an intuitive understanding of machinery that had earned him positions on 7 different space stations across the Outer Rim territories. When the job posting for Mining Station Kepler 442b appeared on his personal communicator 3 weeks ago, he hadn't hesitated to accept. Good mechanics were always in demand, and the isolation pay was too generous to ignore. The transport ship that delivered him to Kepler Station had departed just as the emergency began, leaving Jake completely unaware of the crisis unfolding inside the station. His personal shuttle had docked at Maintenance Bay 7 while all hands were focused on containing the dragon babies in the upper levels. Jake whistled an old Earth tune as he made his way through the maintenance corridors, his tool bag bouncing against his hip with each step. His thermal lunch container swung from his other hand, filled with what he considered the perfect meal after 18 hours of cramped space travel. His grandmother's meatloaf, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans from his hydroponic garden back home, and a slice of apple pie that still radiated warmth from its thermal wrapping. The familiar smell of machine oil and recycled air filled his nostrils as he navigated toward the engineering sector. Something seemed off about the station's ambient noise. There were harmonic vibrations he didn't recognize, and the usual chatter of crew communications was strangely absent. But Jake had learned not to question the quirks of different stations. Every installation had its own personality. "Hello," he called out as he entered the main engineering bay. "Jake Morrison reporting for duty. Where's the duty chief?" Silence answered him, broken only by the gentle hum of perfectly functioning machinery. Jake set down his tool bag and opened his lunch container, releasing the rich aromas of home-cooked food into the recycled air of the station. The smell of seasoned beef, herbs, and buttery potatoes spread through the surrounding corridors like an invisible cloud. He had just taken his first bite of meatloaf when he heard it, a sound like distant thunder, but rhythmic and growing closer. Jake paused mid-chew, his mechanical instincts immediately analyzing the vibrations. Heavy footsteps, multiple sources, moving with purpose through the ventilation system above his head. Probably just the maintenance crew, he muttered to himself, taking another bite. The mashed potatoes were perfect, fluffy, and rich with real dairy products that cost a fortune in the outer territories. His grandmother's recipe never failed to remind him of home. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Jake looked up at the ventilation grate just as 5 pairs of molten gold eyes peered down at him through the metal slats. For a moment, neither human nor dragon babies moved. Jake's fork remained halfway to his mouth, loaded with green beans, while 5 magnificent predators studied him with obvious intelligence. "Well," Jake said quietly, setting down his fork with deliberate calm, "that's new." The largest of the dragon babies, nearly 2.5 meters of scaled muscle and razor claws, tilted its head curiously. Its nostrils flared as it analyzed the unfamiliar scents rising from Jake's meal. The others shifted position, their scales creating subtle, clicking sounds against the metal grating. Jake had always believed that panic was a luxury mechanics couldn't afford. When a reactor core started overloading, you didn't waste time being afraid. You fixed the problem. He applied the same philosophy now, continuing to eat while maintaining eye contact with the creatures above. "You boys smell something interesting?" he asked conversationally, spearing a piece of meatloaf with his fork. "This is Grandma Morrison's famous recipe. Won first place at the Nebraska State Fair 3 years running." One of the smaller dragon babies made a soft chirping sound, almost like a question. Jake raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You're curious about the food, aren't you?" He held up his fork, showing the bite of meatloaf. "It's beef, raised on open pastures back on Earth. The secret ingredient is a touch of Worcestershire sauce and a blend of herbs my family's been using for generations." The creature's golden eyes tracked the movement of his fork with laser focus. Jake noticed their nostrils continuing to flare as they analyzed the complex scent profile of his meal. "Tell you what," Jake said, making a decision that would have horrified the station's security chief. "Why don't you come down here properly? This grate can't be comfortable." To his amazement, the largest dragon baby actually nodded. With fluid grace that defied their size, all 5 creatures disappeared from view. Moments later, Jake heard the soft whisper of moving air as they navigated through the station's ductwork with obvious familiarity. The first dragon baby emerged from a maintenance access panel near the reactor controls, moving with careful precision to avoid damaging any equipment. The others followed, arranging themselves in a semicircle around Jake's improvised dining spot with respectful distance. "Good to meet you properly," Jake said, maintaining his calm tone while every survival instinct screamed warnings about the predators now sharing his workspace. "I'm Jake Morrison, your new mechanic. And you are?" The largest creature stepped forward and made a series of complex harmonic sounds that somehow conveyed meaning despite being completely alien. Jake got the distinct impression of introduction, authority, and curious friendship. "Nice to meet you, too," Jake replied, taking another bite of mashed potatoes. "Though I have to say, you're not what I expected when I took this job." The dragon baby that had approached made another sound, this one clearly indicating interest in the food. Its golden eyes remained fixed on Jake's lunch container with unmistakable hunger. "You want to try some?" Jake asked, genuinely curious about the answer. All 5 creatures nodded simultaneously, their scales brightening with what appeared to be excitement. Jake looked at his lunch, then at the 5 magnificent beings waiting with patient hope. His grandmother had always taught him that the best way to make friends was to share a good meal. The principles seemed to apply regardless of species. "All right then," Jake said, opening his thermal container wider. "But I should warn you, this is human food. I have no idea how it'll affect your digestive systems." The largest dragon baby approached closer, moving with careful deliberation. It extended one clawed hand toward the container, pausing when Jake didn't object. With delicate precision that contradicted its fearsome appearance, it used the tip of one claw to sample a tiny amount of mashed potatoes. The creature's eyes widened with surprise, then delight. It made a pleased, rumbling sound that vibrated through the floor, immediately prompting excited responses from its companions. "Good, huh?" Jake grinned, scooping a proper serving onto his spare maintenance plate. "The butter's real dairy from Earth cows. Cost me half a week's salary to ship it out here, but some things are worth the expense." Within minutes, Jake found himself sharing his lunch with 5 dragon babies who displayed table manners that would have impressed his grandmother. They used their claws with surgical precision, never taking more than offered, and made grateful harmonic sounds after each bite. "You know," Jake said, watching the creatures sample his green beans with obvious enjoyment, "I get the feeling you boys have been misunderstood around here." The largest dragon baby paused in its exploration of apple pie filling and looked directly at Jake with unmistakable intelligence. It made a complex series of sounds that somehow conveyed frustration, loneliness, and hope all at once. "Been trying to make friends, have you?" Jake nodded sympathetically. "Sometimes it takes the right introduction. Foods always work for me. Hard to stay suspicious of someone who's willing to share their meal." As if to prove his point, one of the smaller dragon babies carefully picked up Jake's fallen fork with its claws and handed it back to him with obvious consideration for his limited human digits. "Thanks, buddy," Jake said, accepting the utensil. "I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." The creature's scales began to pulse with warm, rhythmic light, their equivalent of a smile. Outside in the corridor, emergency klaxons continued to wail warnings about containment breaches and hostile entities, but inside the engineering bay, a human mechanic and 5 misunderstood dragon babies shared a meal that would change everything. Jake took another bite of his grandmother's meatloaf and wondered if the station had any more ingredients for cooking. Something told him he was going to need to make a lot more meals in the near future. 3 hours after sharing his lunch with 5 dragon babies, Jake Morrison found himself in the most extraordinary situation of his 32 years. The creatures had not only accepted his offer of friendship, they had appointed themselves as his personal assistants, following him through the maintenance tunnels as he conducted his preliminary inspection of the station systems. "Hand me that plasma wrench," Jake said, pointing toward his tool bag while lying on his back beneath a power coupling assembly. Instead of reaching for the tool himself, he waited to see what would happen. The largest dragon baby, whom Jake had started calling Boss, due to its obvious leadership role, delicately extracted the requested tool using the precise tips of its claws. The creature handed it to Jake with careful attention to grip orientation, demonstrating an understanding of human tool use that should have been impossible. "Perfect," Jake said, accepting the wrench. "You're a natural at this." Boss rumbled with pleased satisfaction, a sound that Jake was learning to interpret as draconic happiness. The other four creatures, whom he'd mentally dubbed Spark, Bolt, Flash, and Gear based on their apparent personalities, arranged themselves around his work area with obvious interest in the repair process. "The problem with this coupling," Jake explained while making adjustments, "is that whoever installed it originally didn't account for thermal expansion under load. See how these connectors show stress fractures?" Spark leaned closer, its golden eyes tracking every movement of Jake's hands. The creature made a questioning harmonic sound. "You want to know why thermal expansion matters?" Jake grinned, genuinely enjoying having such attentive students. "Metal expands when it heats up, contracts when it cools down. If you don't leave room for that movement, the parts crack under stress. Basic engineering principle." Flash suddenly perked up, making an excited chirping noise. The creature pointed one clawed finger at a different section of the coupling assembly, then made a complex series of sounds that Jake was beginning to recognize as their version of explanation. "You see another problem?" Jake asked, following the creature's indication. His eyes widened as he spotted hairline fractures in a secondary connection that he had missed entirely. "I'll be damned. Good catch." The dragon babies exchanged what could only be described as pleased looks. Gear stepped forward and began making rapid harmonic sounds while gesturing at various parts of the assembly. The creature's scale patterns shifted to highlight specific components, creating a visual aid to accompany its verbal explanation. "You're trying to tell me something about the power flow," Jake realized, studying the highlighted patterns. "These sections here, they're carrying more load than they were designed for?" All five creatures nodded enthusiastically, their scales brightening with excitement at being understood. Jake pulled up the power distribution schematics on his portable diagnostic tool, comparing the current readings to the original specifications. The dragon babies were absolutely correct. Several coupling assemblies throughout this sector were operating at dangerous overcapacity. "How did you figure this out?" Jake asked in amazement. "It would take me weeks to map all these power flow irregularities." Boss stepped forward and placed one clawed hand gently on Jake's shoulder. The touch was warm, and Jake felt a subtle, tingling sensation as energy flowed between them. Suddenly, his diagnostic tool blazed alive with data streams he had never seen before. Detailed power flow maps, stress analysis readings, and efficiency calculations that revealed the station's infrastructure in perfect detail. "You're showing me how you see the station," Jake whispered in wonder. "You can perceive energy flows directly." The creature's scales pulsed with warm acknowledgement. Flash made a series of soft sounds that somehow conveyed the concept of gift sharing. They were offering their enhanced perception to help him do his job better. "This is incredible," Jake said, studying the data flowing across his screen. "You can see problems that our sensors can't detect. Potential failures, efficiency bottlenecks, optimization opportunities." Bolt chirped excitedly and gestured toward the main reactor chamber. The creature's scale patterns formed directional indicators, clearly suggesting they should investigate the primary power systems. "You want to show me the reactor?" Jake asked. "Isn't that a bit dangerous for biological life forms?" The dragon babies exchanged what Jake was learning to recognize as amused expressions. Gear made a sound that he interpreted as gentle laughter, while Boss simply walked toward the reactor chamber access tunnel with obvious expectation that Jake would follow. Minutes later, Jake found himself standing in the heart of the station's power generation system, surrounded by controlled stellar fire that should have been instantly lethal to any organic creature. The dragon babies moved through the radiation-saturated environment like fish through water, their scales absorbing and redirecting the deadly energy flows with perfect ease. "You're not just immune to radiation," Jake realized, watching Boss casually lean against a plasma conduit that registered temperatures in the thousands of degrees. "You actually feed on it." Boss nodded and made a complex harmonic explanation. Through the enhanced perception the creatures shared with him, Jake began to understand their true nature. They weren't just baby dragons. They were energy beings in physical form, capable of manipulating power on a fundamental level. Their apparent youth wasn't biological immaturity, but rather newness to this particular dimensional existence. "You're explorers," Jake said with growing comprehension. "Scientists from somewhere else. You came here to study our technology and learn about our species." Flash stepped forward and began the most complex communication attempt yet, weaving harmonic patterns while its scales displayed intricate geometric forms. Jake concentrated on the shared perception link, allowing the alien concepts to flow through his consciousness. Images flashed through his mind, vast spacefaring civilizations that communicated through energy manipulation, ancient protocols for peaceful first contact, and the profound loneliness of intelligent beings discovering a universe full of life they couldn't safely touch. "You've been trying to make contact with other species for a long time," Jake said softly. "But your natural abilities make you seem threatening. Nobody understands that you're trying to be friendly." Spark made a sad, musical sound that conveyed centuries of isolation and misunderstanding. The creature's scales dimmed with melancholy as they remembered countless failed attempts at communication with beings who could only see their power as danger. "But the food worked," Jake continued, pieces clicking into place. "The smell of my lunch, it wasn't just interesting to you. It was proof of something." Gear nodded eagerly, making rapid explanatory sounds while its scales displayed molecular structures that Jake recognized as protein chains and aromatic compounds. "You can analyze the emotional content of food," Jake breathed in amazement. "The love and care that went into preparing it. My grandmother's cooking proved that humans are capable of nurturing creation, not just destruction." Boss approached Jake and gently touched his hand, sharing a flood of sensory data that revealed the true complexity of what the creatures had detected in his simple meal. They had tasted the patience required for slow cooking, the attention to detail and seasoning, the family traditions passed down through generations, and the love that motivated every ingredient choice. "That's why you trusted me," Jake understood. "Because the food proved I was safe to approach." All 5 creatures nodded, their scales brightening with joy at being truly understood for the first time since their arrival. "Well then," Jake said, grinning at his extraordinary companions, "I think it's time we introduced you properly to the rest of the station crew. But first, we should probably turn off those emergency alarms. They're giving me a headache." The dragon babies made unanimous sounds of agreement, clearly sharing his opinion about the annoying klaxons. As they moved toward the communication center to contact Chief Administrator Vextar, Jake couldn't help but smile. He had come to Kepler Station expecting to fix machines. Instead, he was about to help fix the greatest misunderstanding in the history of interstellar relations. His grandmother would be proud. The emergency meeting in Conference Room Alpha had devolved into chaos when Jake Morrison's voice crackled through the communication system, calm and utterly out of place amid the crisis atmosphere. "This is Jake Morrison, new maintenance chief, requesting to speak with Chief Administrator Vextar. I'm in the primary communication center with 5 friendly colleagues who'd like to introduce themselves properly." Chief Administrator Vextar's forearms froze above his control console. Around the conference table, department heads stared at the speakers in stunned disbelief. Security Chief Borghan was the first to recover, his massive frame lurching toward the communication panel. "Human, get away from those creatures immediately." "Borghan, what it? They're extremely dangerous." "Dangerous?" Jake's voice carried obvious confusion. "Boss, Spark, Bolt, Flash, and Gear, these guys couldn't hurt a fly unless it was threatening their friends. They're the most polite beings I've ever met." "Dr." Keth Moran's tentacles writhed with excitement. He's assigned them names, and he's apparently been in direct contact for how long? "About 4 hours now." Jake replied cheerfully. We shared lunch, fixed 17 power coupling issues, optimized the reactor efficiency by another 20%, and had a fascinating discussion about interdimensional energy manipulation theory. Did you know they can perceive electromagnetic fields directly? It's like having living diagnostic equipment. Living diagnostic equipment? Engineer Tocqueville leaned forward, his crystalline features sparkling with interest. Oh, that's just the beginning, Jake continued. They've been trying to help improve your systems since they arrived. Every modification they've made has been an upgrade. They're not invaders. They're the most talented engineering consultants in the galaxy. Chief Administrator Vextar activated his personal communicator. Mr. Morrison, this is Administrator Vextar. Are you currently safe? Safer than I've ever been, sir. Bolt just rewired the communication array to eliminate that annoying static you've been dealing with. And Flash optimized the power distribution to prevent the voltage fluctuations in Section C. They're amazing. He's made contact, Dr. Keth Moran whispered in amazement. Successful first contact with beings we couldn't even approach. Ow! Borghan demanded, his wounded pride struggling with the apparent impossibility. Would you like to ask them yourself? Jake offered. They're very eager to meet everyone properly. Boss has been particularly interested in discussing station security improvements with whoever's in charge of defensive systems. Security Chief Borghan's tusks clicked nervously. It wants to discuss security? Jake corrected gently. And he has some fascinating ideas about energy barrier optimization. Also, Flash would like to apologize for accidentally cutting your communication lines. She didn't realize you were using those cables for external contact and thought they were just redundant internal wiring. She apologized? Dr. Keth Moran's voice pitched higher with excitement. Very sincerely. The whole team feels terrible about the misunderstanding. They've been trying to help, not cause problems. Vextar made a decision that would be remembered in galactic history. Mr. Morrison, would it be possible for you to escort our colleagues to Conference Room Alpha? We'd very much like to meet them properly. I'll ask, Jake said. There was a pause filled with harmonic sounds that somehow conveyed complex communication. They'd be honored to attend. Boss wants to know if it would be appropriate to bring gifts. Gifts? Vextar repeated. They've prepared some technological improvements as friendship offerings. Spark redesigned your environmental systems for 40% better efficiency. Gear created some new crystalline matrices that should improve your computer processing speeds. And Flash has been working on something she calls harmony generators that apparently eliminate stress-inducing electromagnetic frequencies. The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. These beings have been working for hours to improve their hosts' living conditions, viewing themselves as guests rather than conquerors. Please inform our colleagues that gifts would be most welcome, Vextar said formally. And Mr. Morrison, how exactly did you manage to achieve communication when our diplomatic protocols failed? Jake's laughter carried warmth that seemed to ease the tension throughout the station. I share my lunch with them. Turns out Grandma Morrison's meatloaf is the key to interstellar diplomacy. Who knew? 15 minutes later, the door to Conference Room Alpha opened to reveal Jake Morrison flanked by 5 magnificent beings whose scales pulsed with gentle, welcoming light. The dragon babies moved with careful grace, clearly aware that their size and natural weapons could seem threatening to smaller beings. Boss stepped forward and began a complex harmonic introduction, while his scales displayed geometric patterns that somehow conveyed formal greeting, respectful friendship, and deep appreciation for the opportunity to communicate. The other 4 creatures arranged themselves respectfully, their own scale patterns creating a visual symphony of peaceful intention. Dr. Keth Moran rose from her chair, her tentacles weaving patterns of scientific curiosity mixed with diplomatic respect. The honor is entirely ours, she said, somehow understanding that her movement patterns had meaning to these beings. We apologize for our initial misunderstanding. Spark responded with a musical trill that Jake translated. She says no apology is necessary. First contact is always complicated, and they appreciate your patience with the learning process. You can understand them? Borghan asked, his earlier hostility replaced by grudging amazement. They're teaching me, Jake explained. It's not just language, it's direct concept sharing. They communicate through harmonic frequencies, electromagnetic patterns, and something they call energy resonance empathy. Much more efficient than spoken words once you get the hang of it. Gear approached engineer Tocqueville and carefully placed a crystalline structure on the conference table. The device hummed with internal energy, its faceted surface refracting light into impossible patterns. A processing enhancement matrix, Jake interpreted as Gear made explanatory sounds. It should integrate with your existing computer systems and increase computational capacity by approximately 300%. Think of it as their version of a housewarming gift. Flash moved toward communications officer Ythera, offering a device that resembled a metallic flower with petals that sang in harmonious frequencies. Harmony generator, Jake translated. It eliminates stress-inducing electromagnetic noise and promotes psychological well-being. She designed it specifically for avian nervous systems after analyzing your biosignatures. Over the next hour, the Dragon Babies demonstrated invention after invention, each designed to improve life aboard the station. They had created water purification systems that operated at molecular levels, food preservation techniques that maintained perfect nutrition indefinitely, and energy distribution networks that eliminated waste while providing unlimited clean power. But why? Vextar finally asked. Why do all this for beings you've never met? Boss approached the administrator directly, making careful harmonic sounds while his scales displayed images of vast star fields and countless worlds. Jake listened intently, his expression growing more amazed with each translated concept. They're explorers, Jake explained. Their species travels between dimensions, studying different forms of intelligent life. But they've been alone for thousands of years. Every species they encounter either fears them or tries to worship them as gods. No one has ever just accepted them as friends. Until today, Dr. Keth Moran realized. Bolt chirped agreement, then made complex sounds that Jake translated with obvious emotion. She says this station represents the first time in centuries that anyone has welcomed them without fear or expectation. The first time they've been able to share knowledge and friendship freely. What do they want from us in return? Borghan asked, his military mind still seeking tactical advantage. The 5 Dragon Babies exchanged glances, then Boss made a simple harmonic sound that Jake translated with a smile. To be friends. To share meals. To work together and learn from each other. To not be alone anymore. Spark added something that made Jake laugh out loud. And Spark wants to know if anyone else has grandmothers who cook, because apparently my meatloaf was the most emotionally complex culinary creation they've ever analyzed. As laughter filled conference room alpha for the first time in days, Chief Administrator Vextar realized that mining station Kepler 442b had just become the site of the most significant diplomatic breakthrough in galactic history. All because a human mechanic had been willing to share his lunch with 5 lonely beings who had been waiting centuries for someone to offer them friendship instead of fear. Well then, Vextar said, his 4 arms gesturing in formal welcome, I believe this calls for a proper celebration. Mr. Morrison, do you think our new colleagues will be interested in attending a station-wide feast in their honor? The Dragon Baby's scales blazed with delighted anticipation, their harmonic response needing no translation. Some expressions of joy were universal, regardless of species or dimension of origin. Jake grinned at his extraordinary friends. I'll take that as a yes. But I should warn you, if we're cooking for them, we're going to need a lot more ingredients. These guys have serious appetites. Outside the viewports, the gas giant Kepler 442b continued its eternal dance through space, its storms casting purple light across a mining station that had just become the first embassy between humanity and beings of living energy. And in the station's kitchen, crew members from 17 species began the joyful work of preparing the largest dinner party in the history of interstellar relations, guided by a human mechanic who understood that sometimes the most profound connections begin with the simple act of sharing a meal.